A Lantern, Chapter 31. Abby made her usual extensive preparations for Christmas that year. The daughters and daughters-in-law said a great deal against her using up so much energy. "But you might as well talk to the wind," Grace wrote to Isabel. "There's something stubborn about Mother. She is bound to go through with all that mincemeat, donut, popcorn ball ordeal, even if she's sick in bed afterwards. Margaret wants us to come there to save all that work, and Emma and Louise have both offered their homes too, but she won't listen. No, she says, as long as I'm here, the Christmas gathering is here. I've tried to tell her over and over that conditions have changed, that we don't live out on an isolated prairie anymore, that she doesn't make one thing that she couldn't buy, but she just won't catch up with the times. They're not so full of Christmas spirit when you don't fix them yourself," she says. "Isn't that the last word in old-fashioned ideas?" So the clan came once more to the old farmhouse behind the cedars. Grace was the first to arrive in her own roadster, coming over the graveled highway from Wesleyan University. The others arrived at various times before Christmas Eve. Mac and Emma, Donald and Catherine came. Only Stanley was missing from the MacDeal family. Having married, Stanley had discovered that a wife's people must also be reckoned with. Margaret and Dr. Fred Baker, Dr. Fred Jr., and his wife and two little boys came. Isabel and Harrison Rhodes got in from Chicago on the afternoon train. The road boasting a flyer now instead of the old baggage and day affair of the time when the children were small. John and Eloise Wentworth and Laura and Millard, who was 8 now, all came over from their home on the other side of Cedartown in time for the evening meal. Every car was loaded to the doors with packages. Abby had an oyster supper. That too was a hangover from the days when seafood was scarce and expensive. No matter what the bivalves were on every menu placed before the various members of the Deal family these days, Abby continued to have an oyster supper each Christmas Eve. Bowls of crackers alternating down the long table with celery standing in upright vase-looking dishes, like so many bouquets from the greenhouse. Jimmy Buchanan came over later in the evening and brought Catherine a gift. Jimmy was rather astounded at the sight of so many relatives. "Everyone has to be here," Catherine told him. "In all the wedding ceremonies, whenever a Deal is married, the question is asked, 'Do you solemnly promise to spend all your Christmases at Granny Deal's, forsaking all others as long as you shall live?' And if you can't promise, out you go before you're in." Abby Deal was embarrassed beyond words to speak so to a young man with whom you were keeping company. Catherine went on. "No, sir, it wouldn't be Christmas without the wax flowers in the parlor and the patent rocking chair and the painting of the purple cow and the what nut. Grandma makes us all animal cookies yet. Can you beat it? When I was big enough to read love stories by the dozens, she gave me The Frog That Would a Woo and Go. Not but that it has its romantic appeal, too. We always stay 2 nights, and we have beds everywhere. Granny puts us in corners on couches, sinks, bathtubs, ironing boards, and not one of us would miss it. Donald passed up a dance at the Fontanelle for it. You can't tell the reason, but the minute you see the old cedar trees and come up the lane under the bombarded poplars with snow on them, you're just a little crazy over Christmas." There were some very lovely presents the next morning. The radio in its dull finished cabinet for Abby. Jewelry, a fur, expensive toys and books, an old musty-smelling one for Emma, who had gone in for the first and rare editions. Margaret gave her mother the painting of the prairie with the sunshine lying in little yellow-pink pools between the low rolling hills. "For I think you made me love it, Mother. When I was a little girl, I learned to see it through your eyes," she told her. In the afternoon, Mackenzie Deal, the Omaha banker, in an overcoat and an old muffler that had been his father's, spent a large share of his time out in the barn cracking walnuts on a cottonwood chunk. John Deal, the state legislator, went up into the hayloft and potted a few pigeons with an old half-rusty rifle. Isabel Deal Rhodes, the well-known Chicago singer, called her husband to help her get out the old reed organ out of the storehouse. She dusted it, and then, amid a great deal of hilarity, pumped out "By the Blue Alsatian Mountains." One of the keys gave forth no sound at all, so whenever she came to it, the young folks all shouted the missing note. By evening, the younger members of the group had gone. Fred Jr. and his family back to Lincoln, Donald and Wentworth to Omaha, while Catherine was off somewhere with Jimmy Buchanan. But the others, in the early dusk of the Christmas twilight, gathered in the parlor with the homely coal burner and the lovely floor lamp, with Abby's crude painting of the prairie and Margaret's exquisite one, with the Whatnot and the blue plush album and the tidy on the back of the patent rocker. There was one Christmas we had, Mother Mac said, that I always remember more than the others. I can see the things yet. My old brass cornet, a big wooden horse made out of logs, a tree that looked, well, I've never seen a tree since look so grand. Where in Sam Hill did you raise all the things in those days? I think I know which one you mean, Abby was reminiscent. It was the year after the grasshoppers. Well, my son, your father and I made all those things out of sticks and rags and patches and love. It brought on a flood of reminiscences. Remember, Mac, the Sunday afternoon we were herding the hogs on the prairie? And that Jake Smith that kept the store at Unadilla came along with his girl in a spring wagon and threw a whole handful of stick candy out in the grass for us? Mrs. Frederick Hamilton Baker, well-known artist and clubwoman of Lincoln, was speaking. Do I? I can see them yet. Red and white striped, and looking as big as barber poles to me. I wondered how anyone in the world could be that rich and lavish. Mackenzie Deal, a vice president of one of the Omaha banks, was answering. And do you remember, John, how scared you were the time we chased the calf and you grabbed it by the tail when it ran by you and the tail was frozen and came off in your hands? When they had all laughed at the recollection, Isabel put in, but I'll bet he wasn't as scared as I was once. The time a man came to the door and told Father he was drawn on the jury. You all stood around looking solemn, and I took a run for Mother's old wardrobe and hid behind the clothes and cried. Why, what did you think? They were all asking. Well, I knew jury had something to do with the law, and jails and penitentiaries, and I had heard of hung, quartered, and drawn, so the inference was that Father was going to be hung in the penitentiary. I remember once when I wasn't scared but mad. It was Grace's contribution. It was when Aunt Regina came to help Mother take care of Grandma. I was modestly effacing myself under the dining room table when she scooped me out with a sprightly, "So this is little Grace." Then she took me on her lap and put her arms around me and pressed me to her bosom and apparently forgot me, while she and Mother verbally married off and buried all the relatives over my head. Why didn't you have the gumption to get down? Too bashful, I suppose. That's where your ancient theories of child training come in. No modern child would stand it. But I just sat while my legs went to sleep and my brain atrophied. I used to think I sat there a month, but I know now it couldn't have been more than a week. That's as bad as I was, it was John. Remember that preacher that used to stop at our house, the one with the beard that looked as though it was made out of yellow rope? Who could forget it? He had it tied up like a horse's tail when he ate. They were all answering at once. First time he stopped, he said to Mac, "What's your name, son?" Mac said, "Mackenzie." "And what's yours, little man?" he said to me. I was so scared I said Mackenzie too. Can you beat it? I'll bet there isn't a kid living today as bashful as that. Do you remember, it was Isabel, the old milk wagon? John, you rigged up to peddle your milk in? I can smell the inside of it yet, the damp Swedish odor of warm milk. Remember how you used to ring an old cowbell and the women would come out with their pans and pitchers and have their aprons twisted up over their heads? Think of evil-looking germs that must have perched on the rims of those pitchers when the dust swirled around. And so they went on, recalling their childhood days. Days of sunburn and days of chilblains, of made-over clothes and cornbread meals, of trudging behind plows or picking up potatoes, of work that was interwoven with fun because youth was youth. Prairie children never forget. Far into the evening, they sat around the old coal burner, talking and laughing, with tears not far behind the laughter. The state legislator and the banker, the artist, the singer, and the college teacher. And in their midst, rocking and smiling, sat the little old lady who brought them up with a song upon her lips and a lantern in her hand.